Public Library, and we want to thank them for hosting us again. We want to thank our friends at MCAT for producing these programs. It's Wednesdays with the Mayor. We're here with Mayor Jordan Hess to talk about Marshall Mountain tonight. I'm excited about that. It's been a project that has been, in the offing for many years. People have wondered what will happen at Marshall Mountain. So we'll talk about that tonight, and we'll talk about the new conceptual plan, which was just released this week, what some of those details are, and how the proposal is to put this over into public ownership and what that looks like. So let's go ahead and get started, Jordan, and dive right in here and talk about a little bit about the history. Not everybody may remember when Marshall Mountain was a big operating ski area. I know when I moved here, it had just closed not too long before that. And gosh, for a decade or more, we were wondering what's going to happen up at Marshall Mountain. And there was talk about, well, it could be this, it could be that. It got to be a very popular destination for hikers and mountain bikers over the years. And then I guess it was a couple of years ago, all of a sudden we had an out-of-state buyer, right, come into the situation, and there was this proposal to buy it. And then everybody got excited about what was going to happen there. Tell me a little bit about what you've kind of observed as, some of this background.
Yeah, so, I mean, Marshall Mountain closed, I guess, a couple decades ago now, really, yeah. And really for that entire time, it has been a public objective to acquire that as part of our open space system. That Marshall Mountain has, it's been beloved as, I can't tell you the number of people who said that they learned to ski there, or they spent their childhood there, or whatnot. And so it's been part of the city and county open space planning process for really for a couple of, since that closure occurred. And as you mentioned, a few years ago, there was an attempt by a private out-of-state buyer to buy the thing, and just to turn it into a residence. And it'd be a beautiful place for a residence, of course. I can't fault anyone for wanting to do that, but it would have shut off public access. So the proposal, or the city frequently, when the city or county acquires open space, we work with a third party. That's oftentimes a nonprofit, like Five Valleys Land Trust, and those third parties will help us by acquiring land and holding it while we can support a public process to determine whether or not it's appropriate to move forward with the acquisition. And that's pretty common in our open space land. Government just can't be that nimble with the processes that we go through. We can't be that nimble to buy a piece of property like Marshall Mountain as on the open real estate market. So we rely on these third parties like Five Valleys Land Trust, or like the Nature Conservancy, or the Conservation Fund, or others to facilitate these transactions. A group of local individuals actually stepped in, Izzy Dog LLC. They bought Marshall Mountain, and they have been leasing it to the city for the last couple of years. And we're really grateful for that, for them stepping in with that philanthropic mindset of really preserving Marshall for future generations.
We actually, when that was announced too, I remember we got to meet Izzy, the dog. That was kind of fun. And that's been, summer, I want to say about July of August of 2021. Mm-hmm. So yep. It was there. And of course, as part of that, there was a discussion that their intentions were to be that third party to, set aside, but allow some public use in the meantime, right?
Yeah.
And then give some time to transfer over to full public ownership.
Yeah, so they opened, provided a lease arrangement so that the city could lease that space and have access to that mountain and utilize that during the time that we go through this planning process, and that we could do our due diligence. It's still not a foregone conclusion that we'll buy the mountain. It's certainly, there's a lot of work setting us up for that, but there's a lot of public process that goes into decisions like this. So grateful for their generosity in setting that up for us to be able to take that time.
And I know one of the things at that point in time, in fact, when the private pending sale came along there at that point, we heard from a lot of the user groups, the mountain bike groups, the different groups, that had been using the property because, of course, when it was owned by the family for many years after the ski resort, right, it was open and they allowed access across that site, right? And so the idea was, how do we maintain that in the meantime? And so that was part of the agreement with Izzy Dog.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so what kind of things have been going on up there if people don't know, what's been happening at Marshall Mountain since 2021?
Yeah, well, so we have been operating city programs up there for those couple of years. I think that's a place where our Parks and Recreation Department can offer kids programs in particular. So we take kids camps up there during the summer, and we have mountain biking classes, or we have different camps that we operate up there. And literally hundreds of kids are going through there, and so it's a really great opportunity for us to take kids who might not otherwise get the opportunity to do something like that as part of our summer camps and get up there. And that's really important for a number of reasons. So our access to public lands is actually limited as a public entity, kind of strangely, but the Forest Service has permits for group use. And we're at our cap, so we can't utilize more Forest Service land because we're already utilizing it so heavily as through things like the Parks and Recreation camps. So having access to Marshall Mountain allows us to have a resource that is available for those kids' camps. And so I think that as we grow, certainly through the pandemic, we saw more and more people take an interest in recreating on public lands. And as we grow and as that trend continues, adding Marshall Mountain is a way to increase capacity for outdoor recreation and for land conservation.
Let's talk a little bit about the mixed use of the site, and we'll get into the plans a little bit more, but let's talk about, kind of this interim period post-ski resort prior to public ownership situation. Because I know that summer of 21, when the sale was pending, you'd go up there to, get some footage or those kinds of things. And I was amazed the constant, it's a busy place in the winter, obviously, with cross-country skiing. But during the summer even, there's always somebody, unloading a mountain bike or further down, getting a backpack out to, for a day hike or those kinds of things. What are some of those sort of historical uses that we've seen at that facility on a year-round basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wide range. So people go up there and hike. There's, the city has sponsored Christmas tree cutting up there. There's obviously the mountain bike component. There's equestrian users. There's the learn to ski component and the close access for skiing when the snow conditions are right. It's historically been used for weddings or events, with the mountain biking development, there's the opportunity to really bring in national or to bring in events or competitions of a regional or national scale. And so we really, it's a place that has a little bit of something for everyone. It's a beautiful place just to go up and be. I mean, even if you're not doing some active recreation, it's just a beautiful location. So it really has been a mix of uses over these last couple of years.
Now let's talk about the property itself and the adjoining lands, because we talk about Marshall Mountain, we're talking about basically that base camp and the immediate ski slopes, the old ski slopes that were there, and the access road and parking, right? So let's talk a little bit about what's around Marshall Mountain and how that, around the base, the old ski resort, and how that all kind of ties together in terms of what goes on there in the valley.
Yes.
And the surrounding mountains.
So it's unique because it is completely surrounded by public land. It is completely surrounded by Forest Service land, and there are 3 parcels. It is just shy of a square mile. It's 3/4 of a section. So there's 360-acre parcels, and those have been acquired in different ways over the years. The Nature Conservancy acquired one of them and donated that to Five Valleys Land Trust. The Izzy Dog LLC, of course, acquired this parcel. And then there's a third parcel that is kind of tucked behind with not very good access. And that was also privately owned by a local family. And that's been acquired by the Conservation Fund. And so now all 3 of those, all 480 acres, are coming into play and will be transferred to public ownership. And so it'll be, all the way from Mount Jumbo up to into Gold Creek, and I mean it'll be a wide swath of public land without interruption. Different managers, of course.
And historically we've seen this, and I know in the plans it talks about the ways to tie all of that together, right? Because you have, on the way up there, you have other trailheads, there's different places. The idea is to sort of have all of this networked, right? So that it's available for this multi-use type facility that's sort of around that base of Marshall Mountain.
Yeah, so it's a front country site that you can drive to, that you can recreate at the lodge, that you can, but it has backcountry access, and so you can access up into the Rattlesnake, and you can access backcountry places. So it's really unique in that way.
Now there are some private parcels in that vicinity, right? And so we're not talking about doing anything with those. So there's a couple of, I'm thinking on the, I get my directions mixed up, but on one of the uphill sides next to Marshall Mountain, there's a couple of, so there's some areas up in there that are still privately held,
Yeah.
and that's not part of
No,
this
that's not part of this.
situation at all, right? Okay, good. All right, well, let's talk about then where, let's talk about let's talk money right off the bat. So as part of the Izzy Dog deal, when they picked it up, there was a certain value that was sort of a target. It was placed on that. We, of course, know what's happened to land values and those kind of things and costs and things. Let's explain the funding part of this and how it was envisioned in 21 and where we're at now.
Yeah, so the voters approved, I guess I'll go back before 21.
Yeah, even before that.
The voters approved open space bond. That was a $15 million bond, and that was split between the county and the city, $7.5 million each. So that funding is already voter approved. It's already essentially allocated to open space projects. And that was the first step of enabling public funding of open space. We've had a rich history of that. I think our first open space bond was I think it was in 1980. And then we've had one in 1995, we had one in 2006, we had one in, I think it was 2018. We've utilized that mechanism for other projects. Funding the Fort Missoula Regional Park was through the state open space enabling statute. So it's something that we have a rich history of using in Missoula. And the voters have come time and time again and supported those acquisitions. So the Izzy Dog bought the parcel at a market rate, and one of the things that's really generous is that they're donating a portion of the value. So the three parcels will be a total, I think, a $2.4 million purchase price, and that includes all three parcels. So it is below market rate, and it is reflecting that generosity of those landowners as well as the various nonprofits that have been involved.
And this kind of backs up a little bit. So we talk about the bond programs. Oftentimes that's a way to leverage other money, isn't it? And explain that just for a little bit. Give us a thumbnail of how that, when you have that local pot of money, how that can open ways to access other, state, federal funding, other conservation funding.
Yeah,
for
so
something like this.
there's some grant funding through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There's some grant funding through some private foundations. We've received grant funding for maintaining our open space through the state, DNRC, and so those are all avenues that we can stretch these dollars. Further. The Conservation Lands Program at the city does a great job of leveraging grant funding, particularly for maintenance. So if it's a forestry project, if it's a forest thinning project, or a noxious weed project, that's really been a successful program, or a successful program in terms of pulling in grant funding.
And in this case, too, you have something like the habitat restoration. We'll talk about that, but habitat restoration might open some, dollars that are available from land and water conservation or those kinds of programs that are specifically targeted to certain improvements or activities, right?
Yeah.
Management activities.
And we've got good partners in the nonprofit sector. A great example is Trout Unlimited was a great partner in restoring Rattlesnake Creek. After the city acquired Mountain Water Company and no longer had a need for some of the diversion dam structures on Rattlesnake Creek, Trout Unlimited was a great partner in helping restore, remove diversion dams from the creek and restore the natural flow of the creek. Marshall Creek is a stream of significance in terms of bull trout. It's a pure fishery, and I think the same is true with Rattlesnake Creek. And so these are really important in terms of the overall health of the Clark Fork as well.
And I want to clarify one thing too, because somebody may look at this, because there are, you mentioned Fort Missoula Regional Park or other things where sometimes we go to the voters and there's a specific piece of a bond or something like that to finance. This, we're not talking about a new measure to go to voters with the way this is being structured.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, so this is already approved, already allocated by the voters, and and then expending the open space money is a duty of the county commissioners and the city council.
Now, you mentioned county commissioners, and let's talk about kind of recent events here over the past month. Because originally it was, the county was always, I can remember Commissioner Slotnick being there when the deal was announced. They've always been a partner and a participant in this. But there was a bit of a change in terms of taking lead agency status, pursuing the final funding and those things. Talk a little bit about how the county now is plugged in and what may have changed here.
Yeah, I think, and I'd like to point out that Chet Krauser from Missoula County is here, and we can, I don't want to speak for Missoula County, but I will say that I think the commissioners are really excited about the project. And Missoula County has done a wonderful job through their open space program, really in preserving working lands and agricultural lands in particular. And this is new territory for them in terms of getting into the recreation space. But it's a lot more than a recreation project. I mean, it is a land stewardship project, and I think it aligns closely with a lot of the county's land goals. And so I think that's why they're taking on this broader role. And it's a great partnership. Fort Missoula Regional Park is a great example of a park that we both have ownership in certain portions of it. The city manages that under an agreement between the city and county, and there's a financial exchange that where both entities support that. And I think Marshall Mountain will have a similar model where the county will own it. There might be some, whether the county does the maintenance and the city does the programming, or those are all details that are being worked out, but that partnership will certainly continue.
And those are fairly common to have those, we call them interlocal agreements, right? And the idea is to leverage certain abilities, management, certain programmatic functions, right?
Yeah.
That's how those agreements work oftentimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And those will be structured in a way so that it runs with, over a long period of time. We enjoy a really good relationship with our host county, the city of Missoula does. That's not the case in most city-county relationships around the state. And so we're grateful for that relationship and the partnership.
We'll circle back with Chet and get a little bit more on the county piece here in a little bit, but I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about this conceptual plan. So a little bit of the background on this, there was some surveys and things, right, that took place this past winter. Those were to kind of get a general initial sketch, if you will, right, of what people were looking at, what were some of the uses they might envision if dollar was no problem or we had all of our ideas, right? So talk us a little bit about what's gone on maybe in the last 6 to 8 months in terms of getting something down onto a plan.
Yeah, so the planning process, I mean, the main purpose of those planning processes is to make sure that we're capturing feedback from all of the potential user groups. So this is proximate to East Missoula and Bonner Milltown and West Riverside, and it's an area that's had a deficit of open space compared to the rest of the community. So it's an opportunity to specifically reach out through the community councils and get their feedback. It's also an opportunity to reach out to specific user groups. So there's obviously a strong interest in the mountain bike community in Marshall Mountain. But there are many other user groups. So the master plan takes all of that feedback from those different groups and understands how to balance those. When do we, what do we prioritize where? And then ultimately, how do we prioritize the scarce funding? So there's the acquisition, and then there's an effort that will largely be privately funded through private donations from the Friends of Marshall Mountain group. And that group is raising funds to make improvements at Marshall Mountain. So those might be phased. There might be there might be a pavilion in an early phase, but then a building at a later phase. And those sorts of decisions the master plan helps guide those.
Now I noticed, of course let's talk about what's up there now, right? So you have the lodge that was historically, and it's still a pretty good building, right? So there's some idea of using some of those facilities that are there, but then being able to either replace, supplement, again, depending upon where we end up with this master plan, right?
Yeah. So the master plan is available for comment right now. It's at MissoulaCountyVoice.com, I believe, and that's the Missoula County engagement website. And there's an opportunity to view that and provide comment.
I think it's on Engage Missoula too, as well.
Yeah, so Engage Missoula is the city engagement website.
Yeah. And some of the features would not be there. I mean, obviously, one of the most visual things are the old ski lifts,
Yeah.
right? And I'm always looking at them going, I might even be able to mountain bike this if there was a way to catch a ride up the top. But I guess those are the kinds of things that we would, so some things would be removed
Yeah.
to make way in this transition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the master plan spells out all of that kind of, the steps necessary like that.
Okay. And we're still talking multi-use, though, right? I mean, everything I've read really talks about finding these shared ways to manage, whether it's trails or facilities or those things. I mean, obviously, we have a very vocal mountain bike group. They love it, or cross country in the winter. But we really are talking multi-use. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's certainly a mountain bike user group that's very interested in the site and uses it. They've done a lot of volunteer work on the trails. There's also a lot of other users. There's the various kids camps that I talked about, and accommodating those groups. There's obviously hiking access. We manage all of our spaces with multiple users in mind, and there's really room in all of our open space. Some of our open space is managed for habitat and or for native plants, and so there's a lot of different ways to manage open space, and it's certainly not for one particular group at the expense of others.
Now, it may be too early to even ask this question, but one of the things that I know has been a hallmark of a lot of these programs has been either low cost, no cost, affordability for families or user groups or things. Talk a little bit about that philosophically. Are we talking about a facility that's great, but nobody can afford to go there? I mean, as the devil's advocate, I always have to ask that question.
No, absolutely not. And so one of the things that's great about particularly the programming through the Missoula Parks and Recreation Department is that it's offered. And I'll go back to the kids camp. They're really inclusive. So ability to pay is not a barrier to participation. We have scholarships for families that need them. They're low cost to begin with. It really is an opportunity for kids in our community who might not have the opportunity to get out and enjoy outdoor recreation to have equitable access and to have the opportunity to have those experiences. And so we oftentimes, the Moon Randolph Homestead up in the north side is a great example of, it's a city-owned operating historic homestead, and there's livestock up there, and there's fruit trees, and there's all these things that you'd see in a late 1800s homestead. And we have kids camps that go up there, and they get to work on the homestead, and they get to have those experiences. And for a lot of those, kids, that's the only way that they would have access to that kind of agricultural background, or that kind of access to working lands, or that kind of access to spending time in open space. So it's a big part of our goal to just make sure that kids in our community get that kind of exposure and get those opportunities.
It's really about experience, isn't it? It's about the experience of living here and having it be a part of our lives and what happens. We'll go to questions here in just a couple of minutes. I do want to ask about where we go from here. Can you walk us through maybe the next 6 months or so, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit from the county's perspective too, as part of this. But give us just a thumbnail of where this happens and what we're expecting as we go through the remainder of this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the city and county both have open space advisory boards, and those boards thoroughly vet any expenditure of open space funds. So that process is beginning this spring and will continue through the summer. And those boards are citizen appointed. They're resident boards. They have a diversity of folks that are members, different backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, different ages and demographic backgrounds, different recreation abilities, and really they come in and they look at these projects holistically, and they determine, is this a good use of public funds? Is this a good expenditure of of funds to, is it a good value to the taxpayer? Is
And
it,
that's really part of that accountability.
It is, yeah.
Which is part of the process all the time.
yeah.
right?
And, I can tell you that we're not going to bring a project to those boards that we don't already feel is a.
Yeah, because it's a lot of wasted work.
It
if
is,
You don't
yeah.
have something that's a real good pitch.
Yeah, and so that's really the next step. And then the county into the fall will, I'm going to just reference the timeline just so I don't get it wrong here,
Sure.
but the county will vet the possibility of really becoming the long-term owner at that time. And then in the fall, we have, with these joint city-county acquisitions, we do a joint public hearing. So we have a public hearing with the city, the city council and the board of county commissioners, and that's where we, again, take public comment in a formalized way on top of all of the comment that's come through the master plan and the open space advisory committees and whatnot. And then ideally acquisition in late fall, early winter, following that process.
Are we facing, and I think this came out in the last discussion about, this transition, are we facing any hard deadlines with Izzy Dog to complete this? Is it like we've got to have this by January 1st or December 1st or whatever? What's the, is there a hard date?
There are firm dates that are, that
Firmish.
firmish, that they've been fairly, they've been really generous with extending. There was a built-in lease extension in the lease. We've exercised that once. They've been flexible with us. They are good people who want the acquisition to work, and they're being very accommodating. We can't sit on this for too long, but it is, they have been accommodating and they have been working with us.
Well, and it sounds like if we have the funding available, that would be, it's just a case of pulling the pieces together, right? So it's not like you have to, go out to the voters again or do those kind of things, which could necessarily delay it further, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we're going to go with questions, but I want to get county perspective. Let's go ahead and give introductions here while I get set up. And who have you got with you here
So
tonight?
this is Chet Krauser from the Missoula County, and Chet runs the. I'll let you describe your role, but Chet runs the county's conservation lands program, and as part of the Community and Planning Services Department.
Chet, go ahead and stand up here. We'll go on this camera, I think. So let's talk about, from the county's perspective, give us a little thumbnail. The mayor's talked a little bit about what happens, but tell us a little bit about the county's involvement and kind of mechanically how that's worked.
Yeah, so we have, within Lands and Communities, which is kind of the new department, I guess some of you might be familiar with CAPS, Community and Planning Services. We've been undergoing some restructuring there, but within that office, we have the county's Parks, Trails, and Open Lands program. And then we have county planning, we've got grants, and we also have the ecology and extension program as well. So we have tried to align some of those like departments within the county to help position us for projects like this. So that's one of the reasons that you're seeing the county become more involved in this arena. We're also pulling together some of what the county has done around the parks and recreation space, again, into a more cohesive group. So if you think about the fairgrounds is one example of work the county has been engaged in recently. If you haven't been, I hope you go down and check it out.
I love that new stone fence on the one side there on South is just beautiful.
Yeah, it's really changed the look and feel, but I think also the engagement from the public. So that's one of the examples that you might not think of the county, but that's one of the things that we've certainly been involved with. And then there's a lot of county parks as well as our paved trails, and there was a recent master plan for expanding county paved trails. So we've really tried to embrace work we're already doing and also structure our ability to respond. So in terms of Marshall, we have our open space staff working on some of those grant funds, in addition to the boards that Mayor Hess mentioned in terms of our Open Lands Committee, and helping usher the process along to consider open space bond fund expenditures for the acquisition. So those are some of the things that we're working on. And then we do fall back, and Mayor has talked about this too, on the long-term relationship that we've had with the city. And I guess I would just describe it as a shift in the way that the county is able to partner with the city, and we're continuing to just adapt and evolve in a way that I think will hopefully serve all of the constituents, both city and county, in a better way.
Is the idea too with doing it this way, you're able to plug in and look at, say, the matrix of, the number of trails we have or the number of opportunities or number of acres. are you then able to calculate in something like Marshall Mountain? And does that make a stronger case too if you have that kind of data to find funding or those kinds of?
Yeah, I think we've had Marshall Mountain, as we've talked about, has been on the radar for a long time, and I think it fits into a lot of the other open lands projects that we've seen around Missoula that's really unique. I mean, some folks might say, opportunity of a lifetime to capture what has such a rich history for residents that have been here for a long time, as well as sort of the new uses and opportunities. And then I think it hits a lot of the values that we see, at least in the county growth policy and in a lot of the direction that we get from our commission in terms of natural resources, recreation, the open spaces that we all appreciate here, or at least most of the folks do. So all of those things come into play. And then, of course, we also look at our planning efforts around open space specifically, which has identified the area around Marshall as one of those key areas. And then we have a number of other processes, plans, surveys, et cetera, that have engaged the public over the years to try to understand what the needs are and then engage in these opportunities as they arise, knowing that they've been pointed out to us by the public.
Final question we talk about, the conceptual plan was just released, and people can comment on that until the 19th of June. In these coming months, do you have to work out all of the interlocal agreements prior to this being a done deal? Or what's kind of the timing of working out some of those details that the mayor talked about?
Yeah, we're actively working on some of those conversations with the city to figure out what kind of relationship makes the most sense. Certainly in the programming space, and Mayor has talked a lot about the youth opportunities, some of those camps, just the sheer numbers and the inability to find space and how unique this project could be in terms of expanding opportunities for youth throughout Missoula. So we've looked at that saying, wow, you're doing a great job already. Maybe that's an area you want to continue to operate in, and let's structure some of the other agreements that we have around that. We'll still need to work out the county's role in terms of taking on potentially some more operational responsibilities that we hadn't talked about earlier on. That'll also be a part of the interlocal discussions, but those can happen along the way as we also continue to work on all of the acquisition components. It's just like anybody buying a home. There's all sorts of due diligence questions, even more so when you're talking about federal funding opportunities that we have in terms of grants. So we've got a lot of steps there. And I think the key message is it's great to think about what's in the existing conceptual master plan. None of that is realizable if we don't have the parcel, right, or have the property. So first and foremost, it's the acquisition funding process and trying to explore these options to get it into public ownership. And along the way, though, wanting to be able to anticipate questions we're going to hear about. Well, if we own it, what does that look like, and what are the costs? Yeah.
All right, good, Chet. Thank you. Great information there, and we'll get back to him as questions come up. So let's go into the question and answer. I do want to ask one more thing, Mayor, that I recall when we were up there on in that summer of 21, one of the informal topics we were talking about was the road. And I remember there was a little bit of ribbing, like I think we told Commissioner Slotnick, well, it's a county road, those kind of things. What about that access road? Is that anywhere in this early part of this planning and what we're doing right now?
Well, I do believe it is a county road. I think that is, regardless of ownership, I think that's the status of that road right now. And again, I'd go back to what Chet said, that if we don't own the place, we're maintaining a road to nowhere, or a road to
that was kind of the argument at the time.
Access. And so that's something to be considered for sure. We're in conversations with, we have of course, a desire to protect water quality and air quality. So we're in conversations with the health department and with the county about do we pave the parking lot, or do we does that create a water quality issue where there's runoff into the creek or whatnot, versus the air quality trade-off of having a gravel parking lot. And so there's things like that we're talking about.
I would imagine, sorry to interrupt, I would imagine too that you wouldn't really be able to make much of a case for, say, state or federal funding to actually have something at the end of the road, right? Yeah. I mean, it would be nice to fix it ahead of time, but that's not the way the world works.
Yeah, and there is a program, the Federal Lands Access Program. We've been pretty successful at that, leveraging those funds in the past. Those have been deployed to, I think, some improvements on Blue Mountain Road. I think I'm drawing a blank now, but there's been several of those projects that we've been able to use, and that's a U.S. Department of Transportation program that directs money to programs that facilitate accessing federal lands, and it's got transit components. So the shuttle buses up in Glacier Park were funded through that source. But once this is adjacent to federal lands, and there's some planning that could to connect to federal lands, that could be an opportunity as well.
Yeah.
So the acquisition really opens doors for opportunities.
Yeah, they're not going to open the checkbook until you've got something up there.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's go ahead and go to our questions. We got a good group here. I do want to mention too, if you want to phone in, we could take your questions. That number is 406, right, Jenny? I love the. So I got to remember that area code, or two area codes pretty soon. 406-546-7692, 546-7692. So if you got a question, go ahead and call in. Let's go ahead and get on the road here, and we'll talk to some of our folks here. Go ahead and stand up, and which camera do we want to be on, guys? Yeah. Okay, sir. Go ahead and give us your name.
I'm Mike.
Okay.
So my question is, should I ask about Marshall Mountain related questions or about any other public lands in Missoula?
So question would be what?
So I want to ask about public areas like Missoula parks, and problem with right now with these parks practically covered with illegal camping. And my daughter has issues with her safety biking just on it's Milwaukee Trail, just 100 meters across the police station where the police park in the cars. I have a problem with it's a Kim Williams Trail when guys show me the knives he made. So how Missoula City will kind of fix the problem to make the public areas that not in the Marshall Mountains, it's kind of far away, but just inside the city limits, how you can protect these areas, make them safe, and especially make them clean. Because as a hiker, I saw a lot of trash that was just after illegal camps, especially on the Kim Williams Trail to the Saddle, to the Sentinel Mountain, and around. So this is my question.
Good question, Mike. So this is a good point where we talk about, dollars and those kind of things to be able to care for what we've already got in addition to, say, a Marshall Mountain or something like that.
Well, so there's several pieces here. So there's caring for what we've already got, and that's an ongoing thing, and that's always been a thing. And from an open space standpoint, we passed with that 2018 open space bond, we passed a companion mill levy, and that mill levy provided a level of funding for maintaining open spaces. And I think that's important, and that's been an ongoing program for years. I think what the question really relates to is the sudden surge in urban camping and a lot of the challenges that we're seeing in public parks and rights of way throughout the community. And there's a lot going on right there in that area. It's unfortunately a problem of a huge magnitude. We have there were estimates from the federal government, or from, I don't recall the source, but there were estimates that post-pandemic homelessness would increase by 70% in the United States. And we are seeing that in Missoula. We're seeing that in cities around Montana, certainly in Billings and Bozeman, and we're seeing it in cities across the country and across the region. So we're not alone. We have a significant increase in folks living without adequate shelter or without shelter in our communities, and we have limited tools to adequately address those concerns. So I think there's a couple pieces. We have an obligation as Missoulians, as a community, to the compassionate response that we have had over the years. That includes providing shelter space. It includes treating people with dignity and finding ways for folks to make a life in a challenging environment. And we've got good partners with Hope Rescue Mission, with the Pavarello Center, with a variety of service providers working in that space. We also have an obligation to protect parks and trails, and to keep open spaces safe. And we're also operating with some severe constraints. So we have two federal court decisions in the Ninth Circuit that really encumber our ability to enforce our urban camping regulations. In those cases, the most prominent one was Boise versus Martin. And what came out of that case was that cities can't enforce urban camping regulations if there are not adequate shelter beds. So we can't simply say you can't camp here because we don't have a space for someone to go, and the court found that to be a cruel and unusual punishment. What we can do is enforce health and safety violations. So if there's human waste, if there's needle trash, if there's someone blocking a right of way, those are the sorts of things that we can enforce. We stood up a team internally that's our urban camping advisory, our policy advisory team, and that has our police chief, our parks and recreation director, our public works director, our community planning, development and innovation director, our code compliance officer, a representative from the health department, recently municipal court judges joining that, and we're all really trying to get to the same point of how do we address this issue. And I guess the last thing I would say is that there is a lot of work being done in this area. Just the other day, there was Parks Department staff, 27 Parks Department employees that went in and cleaned up an unsafe encampment. The next day it was back. So this is just happening over and over and over again. The answer is sheltering, and the answer, in my opinion, requires action at other levels of government. It requires state and federal funding. In Missoula, we saw our population of folks living unhoused increase dramatically after the legislature cut mental health case management in 2017, and it's been a problem that's increased in magnitude ever since. I read a report last night of folks getting discharged from the state hospital in Warm Spring with they call it the yellow bag problem. They get a yellow backpack with a few weeks of medications and a change of clothes and basically good luck, and then we wonder why we have untreated mental illness, and so it's something that we need to really continue to focus on, certainly at the local level, but also at other levels of government.
Quick follow-up on that, Mayor. When we talk about a facility, say like a Marshall Mountain, Fort Missoula Regional Park, how big of a role do user groups play in kind of that self-policing, and not necessarily with the unhoused, although that's part of the equation, but even just picking up trash, making sure there's not parking problems or those kind of things. If you have a strong user base, are they able to fill some of those gaps?
Yeah, and we have user groups throughout the system in the parks program. So, if there's a Little League tournament, that group has some responsibility with their permit to take care of the facility. And they have some obligations. If you rent a picnic shelter for a family reunion and you have an alcohol permit, there's a deposit, and that deposit is withheld if you trash the place or don't take care of it. And so there's things like that where there's accountability mechanisms. But generally, people take care of our public lands and they care about them. And it's really a small number of users who cause the greatest number of the problems.
That's usually the case.
Yeah.
All right, another question. Let's go back here first. Yeah.
Sorry.
Give us your name, too.
Oh, sorry. Just a site, Library 59, Old Cassie Doe, Beck 1. My question would be, actually, I have two questions, but I don't know which one to ask first.
I'll go ahead and ask the one about parks.
Actually, it wasn't going to be about parks. It was more building on the first person to question. What are the plans on allowing, or at least increasing the construction of bathrooms, places to throw dry trash, and yeah, because I really hate walking the trail and not finding anything.
Yeah.
Thank you. What about that, Jordan, when we talk about facilities, sometimes we'll get a facility, a park facility, a trail facility, something like that. It will open, we say, okay, we'll have restrooms, and then all of a sudden it gets slammed by additional use, or there's an adjacent use that all of a sudden realizes, here's what it is. I know I've talked with FWP, and that's an interesting sidebar of what they're finding, because the dispersed camping issue. You know, they've got a state park, and now all of a sudden, you know, there's all these van life folks and people living in dispersed areas that are now impacting their facilities in a state park. What about that from the standpoint of the city? And you go back and try to assess how are those facilities functioning, and do you need more restrooms? Do you need different trail facilities, or what happens there?
Yeah, so
once you build something.
So at the planning level, we try to plan everything out and for what the need will be and what the demand will be. You know, even I was in a meeting with the Parks Department the other day, and there was a matrix of how many porta potties are required for, depending on how long the event is and hours and how many people are there. And there's a whole formula.
That's a spreadsheet I'd like to see.
But so there's a planning level discussion around events or around, you know, a facility like a park. How is it going to be used? Is it, you know, what is the demand for different things like porta potties or dog poop bags or different things like that. Our master parks plan talks about all of those infrastructure needs to support the use. We also have turf management plans. So if we have an event that brings a lot of people to a park and the turf needs to recover after all that impact, there's plans for how to deal with that, and how do we alter watering and mowing schedules and whatnot. There's also I mean, it's very deliberate, I guess. And we do that because we're trying to allocate scarce resources, and we're trying to be a good steward of taxpayer funds. So we try to be very deliberate about making those decisions with data. We also, of course, just are responsive to or try to be responsive to things that we observe. So if there's a lot of trash, adding a trash can is a great idea. And we just try to be responsive in those ways, but we try to get it right on the planning side.
I know I've talked to a lot of park managers of different organizations over the years, and they say a lot of times something can develop fairly quickly, some kind of an impact, like trash on a trail or something. Unfortunately, the old, what was the old thing? Don't be a litter bug, right? People throw something down, somebody else thinks, oh, it's okay to do that, right? So I know they have often told me they like to hear about those kinds of issues so they can make changes, right?
Well, and just, you know, a great anecdote is that if we provide dog poop bags, there is less dog poop. I think people have a good intention of bringing a bag or not, you know, not allowing their dog to poop, or not leaving the dog poop. But if we provide the service, it gets used. And so that's, you know, in places where we don't provide that, then we have a dog waste problem.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, other questions? Guess we'll hit Carl here for a second. Carl?
Yes, in regards to your homeless problem, I addressed the Poverello when I came, the advocacy program. And the staff actually advocates the problem childs of the Poverello. And I heard another incident. If I was there, I would have immediately dialed 911. And this was a gentleman older than I. An individual literally got in his face and threatened him. And the next day, the individual got in his face, and one of the advocates individual literally advocated of the threatening individual.
But what's the question, Carl?
The question is, why are we advocating the advocation of the problem? You advocate the problem, and you should be, why don't you work with people that clean up their lives and leave them alone and set an example? Bring the camera in, take pictures of these encampments, and put a picture screen in the Poverello and put them on the screen. This is what creates the problem. If you don't show them what creates the problem and start integrating their brain to the problem, you're not going to change the problem.
Yeah,
I don't know where the question is there, because I know that I see what you're saying, Carl, but at the same time, when it comes to the advocacy thing, there is an awful lot of go-between and helping folks that we don't hear about all the time. So
yeah, we've got some really good success stories with, the temporary safe outdoor space is a great example of a space where, and that's for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's out on West Broadway, and it's 40 small, tiny homes essentially, and those the individuals who are living there have wraparound support services that have really been transformational. About nearly 50% of the people who have stayed at the temporary safe outdoor space have availed themselves of services and have transitioned into permanent housing. So they maybe repaired a relationship with a friend or family member. They maybe have accessed some service that allowed them to get some mental health care and have moved into housing. And so those interventions have really worked, and that's the kind of advocacy that I think we can do is really just helping people get the services they need.
That was something we talked about a few months ago. Want to go on? Let's stay on topic here about Marshall Mountain in particular, because we don't want to miss this opportunity because of timing. It's an opportunity to ask these questions while we have these folks here. So specifically, when it comes to Marshall Mountain or the parks planning, any other questions there? I'd like to go back on one part of this, Mayor, and talk about what stays, what goes, because when you talk about a facility like Marshall Mountain, everybody probably has their favorite little corner, or, oh, my memory of here or that. I can remember some of those stories when we were up there. People, oh, I got married here, and those kind of stories. What will change there based on what we've seen in this new conceptual plan?
Yeah, I mean, there's some buildings. Some of the buildings are substandard and need to go. There's, one of the big questions is the iconic clock tower.
The clock tower has been the big question. That's the thing I keep hearing about. Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that. I know that we want to make a nod to that, and maybe Chet might know more specifically what that.
Have we looked at that, Chet, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I
point
think
of consideration is
one
what
thing
Chet
that we've
said.
talked about is if we have a picnic pavilion, maybe the clock tower could be on that, and it could be a way to show that. I know at the Five Valleys Land Trust benefit event last weekend at Washington Grizzly Stadium, they raffled off one of the chairlift chairs, the pink chairlift chairs, and that of course raised money for Five Valleys Land Trust, who's been a great partner in this. But there might be significant interest in the other several dozen chairs up there, and there might be an opportunity there to do something to interpret the history. A lot of what we try to do is we try to. And I don't think it's just related to Marshall, but we try to interpret our history and educate people about our history. So the Bear Tracks Bridge is a great example where it's a transportation facility. It's a bridge. But it also, if you go around the corner, there's interpretive signs that talk about the history of the bridge, the history of indigenous people in the valley before the bridge, the tragic history of the Bitterroot Salish being forcibly marched across the bridge in the late 1800s, the early history of Missoula, and how that, knowing that history of that bridge I think it's important, and I think it helps us understand our history as a valley and as a community, but it also helps us relate and decide who we want to be in the future. And so at Marshall, it'd be great to have some to interpret the history as a ski hill,
As
but
a
also
ski hill, yeah.
also before. And I mean, we're at a point in history, on a continuum, and how we choose to improve this facility is also.
I have to ask about the lift too, and this is me just being a curious guy. Has there been any discussion, or is it in such shape that it really there's no way to utilize that? Because it seems to me, a lot of these ski areas, the ski resorts, Whitefish Mountain, others, I mean, that is a feature they have that you can, ride up the top of the mountain and come down with your bike, or there's different aspects of that as far as part of the infrastructure. Have we analyzed the condition of that ski lift? Is it beyond saving, or is it just not fit with what our conceptual design is?
We did look at that, and getting that operational would be a significant expense.
Because I would imagine it dates back, it's fairly old, right?
Yeah.
As part of the original facility.
Yeah.
So that sounds like that's off the table, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good enough. All right, we'll get back to some other questions here. If we get this, now what happens to the timing of this if people are commenting on this conceptual plan and say, well, we're a little off base here, or we've got to change this design or do something different? Jordan or Chet, is there, what happens to our time frame if we have to extend or go back to the drawing board in any aspects?
Yeah, well, like Chet said, the conceptual master plan doesn't have any value at all if we don't acquire the site. So I think we're at a point where we have done enough feasibility work to understand that we can acquire the site, we can, and of course this due diligence with the various advisory committees, but we're at a point where we understand what it'll cost us to operate the site. If the facilities move around a little bit, or if the phasing of things change, that we can accommodate that through the public comment process.
And I would imagine we're still early enough in the planning, right, in terms of this plan, that you can move things as needed or phase them, right?
Yeah.
That's part of the
Yeah,
idea.
absolutely.
Okay. And if we put this together, and it comes together, have we talked, or is it still too early to talk about how do we market this? How do we, obviously, locals know about it, more locals will find out about it, so you've got that user base built in. But has there been any further discussion about what's the potential for this to be a regional draw, or a new amenity, and how might that impact, the facility and what we end up with, and what the demand is?
Yeah, I'd turn that over to Chet if you.
Chad, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, in the conceptual master plan document, we do talk about the priority being kind of geared toward residents, but I think you're hitting at something a lot of folks would think about it, that there really is a destination here for certain kinds of uses that I think we will see exactly what you're talking about. I think those will be the types of discussions we have around management, and we'll have to talk about fees and things that might apply to certain specific uses. We certainly want it to be available for general public access, but recognize that depending on what some of those user demands might look like, which could include the things you're talking about, we'll need to adapt our management in order to continue to have that primary focus be, hey, this is in the backyard of the community of Missoula and also serves broader county residents. We need to make sure we're taking care of those folks.
I think the reason I ask about that is I think of Brennan's Wave, classic example, where in the first few years it was very much a local sort of thing. Then the word gets out. We get a couple of Instagram posts, and all of a sudden everybody knows. And in this case, you do have for example, a big cyclocross event already planned. I mean, that opens people's eyes when they realize what I think of Brennan's that happened when we had this surf competition, right? So definitely the word gets out.
Yeah, and I think Mayor Hess mentioned this earlier. I mean, it has the potential to serve national competition types of events, and we have partners even beyond just city and county as well. I was just at a meeting this morning talking with Destination Missoula and a number of other agency partners around. It's not just us in our work to serve residents as well as visitors to the community of Missoula. We have a lot of other partners, and so continuing to talk about how we broadly support one another in those efforts is super important as well.
Yeah, that's part of it. Gets back to the sustainable tourism discussion that we've been having this week, right?
Yeah.
And what can happen there. So I want to mention our phone number again one more time, 406-546-7692, 546-7692, if you have a question for Mayor Hess. We have time for a couple more questions. Anybody in the audience we haven't heard from that has a question? Okay. I think we're going to move on here because I think we've covered this pretty well. I do want to ask what your hopes are for this facility. If funding falls in place, if it happens, everything clicks into place here, like Tetris. What are you hoping that Marshall Mountain looks like in, say, 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think we, as Missoulians, we care about our community, and we care about our place, and we care about the people. We care about the reason I keep mentioning kids at Marshall is because this is an opportunity for children in our community to have access to something really special, and that's something that we value and that we talk about a lot as a community, and so and I think our open space program, in my 9 years on the city council, there was nothing more rewarding than acquiring open space, because you could just see it's a perpetual decision, and you could see the joy that it brought. And Mount Dean Stone's a great example, and that was one of the open space cornerstones. So in our open space planning, it was an area that the community identified as being an area that we wanted to preserve. And now there's access for a number of different users. There's habitat. And we have so many different types of open space. So the county has a lot of agricultural conservation easements. The city has some riparian area out at Tower Street and the North Hills, and different types of habitats, different types of spaces, different types of recreational uses. So I think, to me, it's about preserving something for a future generation, for generations into the future. It's about building this cultural infrastructure that enriches our community, and that's what success looks like for me with Marshall Mountain.
Because you really can't. I mean, you just have to look at, there's examples all around us, not only in this region, but nationwide, of communities that said, oh, if we had only, right? Boy, if we could have acquired this piece at one particular point in time, we can't afford to go back and do it now, or it's not available. So the idea is make that available, especially, and I would imagine with the growth that we're seeing, that puts emphasis on trying to find these kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, Mayor Hess, we always appreciate your time. We're at our 1 hour mark, so thank you for your insight. Chet Krauser, thanks for being here, Chet. We always appreciate that. And we would encourage folks to go to the Engage Missoula website. There's a lot more information. And again, comments on this open until June 19th.
And Dennis, I'd like to tease a couple topics for the summer. We'd like to. We're coming up on the 6th anniversary of public ownership of our water system this June 22nd, and so this summer we would like to have one of these programs. You know, as you know, we pick a new topic every month. So we'd like to talk about some of the successes of the water system. The water system leaked more water. It leaked a significant amount of water. Almost 50% of the water pumped leaked out of the system and went back down into the aquifer. And we had pipes in the system that we still do, but we had water mains in the system that were in excess of 100 years old that just were really neglected by the former owner. And we have turned the corner now, 6 years in, where our repairs have we have outpaced the rate of new leaks. So all of our capital investment is paying off, and we're really starting to see those benefits. So that's one. And then another one that we'd like to talk about is our fire department. And our fire department is experiencing significant growth in demand for their services. We want to talk about the good work that they do and some of the future plans for the department.
Sounds like a plan. We'll plan on those 4th Wednesday of every month. And of course, we want to remind folks, if you miss this or you want somebody else to see it, it's always available on MCAT in the stream. And we put those on the YouTube channel on MCAT, don't we? So they're readily available, and you can look at those and share them and analyze. And by all means, come down and join us, or watch at home, or follow it up and get a hold of the mayor's office if you have some other ideas for programs or things you'd like to have. I'm Dennis Bragg. Mayor Jordan Hess, thanks for joining us for Wednesdays with the Mayor.
Thanks, everyone.